You know?
Yes. Here we go.
Okay.
Here we go.
Save that thought.
All right. Settle, people, settle. All right.
They're outstanding.
This is the next
Oh my
to the
God.
last
And your
act of the
sister was
afternoon.
outstanding.
I think
Wow.
there's a word
That's
penultimate.
my dad.
I can't spell it, and I don't know what it means, but I'm pretty sure it's applicable right here. This is the penultimate, which means best. The best act of the day, the one that everybody's been waiting for. I am almost sure there may be a couple of people in this audience who have not heard Donald Davis. Anybody who has not heard Donald Davis, well, what's your damn excuse? You have been under a rock. All right, well, you're here now, and we're going to try and make up for lost time. This is somebody, if you've ever heard Josh Goforth tell a story, well, I'm sorry for you too. But Josh Goforth is a storyteller in the tradition of Donald Davis. As a matter of fact, if you've heard Josh, you hear Donald Davis in everything he says. And that is a high compliment to both people, because they are the best two storytellers, not on this island, not in this state. I'm talking about in this. All right, let's go for the hemisphere. We're talking hemisphere good, right here. And we got Donald Davis on stage right now to show you what I'm talking about. Let's welcome Donald.
To do. He said, I know what we're doing, but you don't necessarily know what we're doing. So while I'm gone, you should not be just randomly putting things together. Randomly. Because you don't know what you're going to come up with. So for example, what we bought today, this saltpeter, potassium nitrate, and this sulfur right here, that's already part of what it takes to make gunpowder. And then he left. And I looked up gunpowder in the old Compton's Encyclopedia. And it said a propellant formerly used in firearms consisting of sulfur, saltpeter, in parentheses potassium nitrate, and charcoal. It didn't say anything about proportions. But I discovered on my first try the proportions didn't seem to matter a whole lot as long as you had some of each one of those things in there. I would take charcoal briquettes in the mortar and pestle, and I grind it all up till I had it real fine like powder. And then I had the powdered sulfur, and then I had the powdered saltpeter, and I'd mix them together about evenly like that. And then what I would do is I would take a Coca-Cola bottle and fill it up right to the top with my homemade gunpowder. And I'd take it out in the edge of the woods and bury that Coca-Cola bottle in the ground right down to its neck. And then I'd make a little trail on the ground like a fuse, getting way back so I could light it. And I'd light the other end of it. And all of a sudden, it would hit the top of that Coca-Cola bottle full of homemade gunpowder, and it looked like a jet engine buried nose down in the ground. Here it came, shooting about this high up in the air, throwing pieces of burning stuff off. Oh, it was absolutely beautiful. It made this wonderful roaring sound, just a roaring sound. Well, next time Uncle Jim came, I had to show him what I'd figured out. He said, well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. You figured that out on your own. I didn't even have to help you. I didn't realize he was planning it all the time. He'd cut holes in the top, and somehow he'd wiggle his feet down in there, and those toes would stick straight up out of those holes. And from years and years of being exposed to the elements, they had these thick yellow toenails. My mama took me to work one day, and here came Daphne with those toes going up and down. And she said, ooh, those toes would make a dog sick. Well, every day about 6 o'clock, that's when we'd show up for work. You see, the theater opened at 6, even though the movies were not going to start till almost 8 o'clock in those days before daylight saving time. But we had a little miniature golf course outside. And the concession stand was running. And there was a big playground in front of the screen. We had a big sliding board. great big swings that would throw you way up in the air. This thing called a merry-go-round. The kids could push and push and push, and it'd sling them off in every direction all over the place. And a great big sand pile to play in. And families would come, and the kids would play, and they'd eat their supper, and they'd play miniature golf. And then they would go back to their cars in time for the second movie. Now, in spite of Daphne and the three of us and Ms. Meese, it took one more person to run the drive-in. Lonnie Young, the projectionist. Projectionists are weird people. They sleep through the daylight, and then they get up at the edge of dark. And from years of looking out through one little missing brick to focus the movie on the screen and keep adjusting the big carbon arc projectors, his eyes got closer and closer together. Lonnie Young had the most exquisite, profane vocabulary of anybody we had ever met at that point in our lives. And we were always hoping for that moment that would happen again and again, where a film would stick. And as soon as it would stick, it would melt down. If you're watching the screen, you'll see it melt down. All the car horns would start blowing and blowing and blowing. And oh my goodness, the words that would come out of there while Lonnie was patching it up and getting it going again were amazing to listen to. All of a sudden, in the projection booth, Lonnie would get on a little microphone and make an announcement. He would say, "If you wish to be served in your cars, please turn on your parking lights." And then 3 16-year-old boys got to go all over the drive-in theater to all the cars that had their parking lights on to get their food orders, which meant we got to go by all the other cars that didn't have their parking lights on because they already had everything they wanted. And we knew everything about everybody. We would have worked there free just for the information we got. Now, we never knew when we were going to finish at night, because the deal was, you showed the first movie, you showed the second movie, but some people understand how 3 women in one county could have 3 boys in 1 year. So notice how you are. You must have sucked the whole bottom out of the gene pool that year. He loved that so much, we would do extra dumb things just to give him the pleasure of telling us again. Well, that day we were mowing, and back in the back of the theater, Daphne was watching. He said, "Boys, over there, it looks like it hadn't been mowed for a month." Well, it hadn't been. Because the first time we mowed over that corner, we discovered a big 2-gallon yellow jacket's nest down in the ground. And we figured it did not need to be mowed over there. Daphne says, "Let me show you how to mow, boys. Let me show you how to mow." We thought, far be it from us to correct him. Maybe he knows how to do something we don't know. And we watched him, his knees going back and forth, toes going up and down in the air. Here he came straight toward that big old yellow jacket's nest. It stuck up out of the ground just enough. You know, you couldn't see it in the grass, but it came up just enough that mower sliced the top off. And the yellow jackets came pouring out of there like everything, and Daphne started running backwards. Now, he was holding on to the lawnmower because he didn't want to leave it over there where all those yellow jackets were. So here he came, running full speed backwards. They're pouring out of there. Now, he could see what he was running from, but he couldn't see where he was going. And he flat, full speed centered a speaker post. Go wham! And when he did, he stopped dead still. The lawnmower didn't even slow down. It came right over his right foot, and all of a sudden something went go-whop. There went that toe right in the air. He went across those pine trees, landed on the roof of George Dewey Stovall's garage. And we stood there and we watched it come walking back down the roof. One step at a time, right down to the edge. So it just jumped off. George Dewey's old dog, Towser, was over there. When that toe stepped off the roof, Towser met it halfway down. Ka-chunk, there he was. Well, we loaded Daphne up. The hospital was just at the top of the hill. Not responsible for what your hands do. What am I? He was always telling about his brothers when they were as old as Joe and I were. He said, let me tell you. He said, Harry and Moody were about as old as Donald and Joe are now. And Daddy was running for the legislature. And one Sunday afternoon, he left an old pack of Camel cigarettes on our kitchen table. He said Mom and Daddy didn't find them because Frank and Harry had them by then. They went outside looking for a place to see if they could smoke one, and they thought about hiding in the barn loft. But then they were afraid Daddy might come to milk and catch them. So they went up the hill behind our house, and they went over the hill down the other side, and they climbed up in little Joe Manford's barn loft, and they lit up a cigarette, and they were passing it back and forth smoking it. When all of a sudden, little Joe came to milk. And Frank said to Harry, hide it, hide it, hide it. And Harry squashed that cigarette and stuck it down in a little crack between two boards in the barn loft. And those boys jumped out the back and ran off. Little Joe saw them run off, but he didn't know what they were doing up there. He went on and milked and went back and went to bed. Boys, way in the night, where that cigarette was stuck between those boards, there was hay trash in there. And it caught fire. And a breeze came. And the old boards caught fire. And nobody knew there was a fire till it came through the roof. It burned that barn clean flat down to the ground. And it didn't take Daddy and little Joe a whole day to figure out what had happened. And our Daddy had to build little Joe a new barn and pay for it. What do you boys think of that story? My little brother Joe said, can we go to bed now? I just got real sleepy. And our mother sitting there at the table had no idea why he told us that. But we knew that he knew. And he'd given us one chance, and we better not count on another one. So here, folks, if you have a child or a grandchild whom you sometimes need to discipline, if they commit a misdemeanor, just get a stick and flail them good. But if they commit a felony, tell them a story that'll keep them in therapy for the rest of their life. Nobody in the family will ever forget.
Oh, what an honor. What a great way if this is your first thing that you got to see this morning.